when Dr. Richard Blackwood, Chief Medical Director of St. Mary's Hospital, grabbed the homeless black woman by her shoulders and physically dragged her out of the ICU, he had no idea he was assaulting Dr. Maya Williams, a former Johns Hopkins resident who had been secretly documenting his medical malpractice for 8 months. "Security, remove this vagrant immediately," Blackwood screamed as Maya clutched the patient files she'd been photographing with her hidden camera. "She's contaminating our sterile environment." What Blackwood didn't know was that the vagrant he just humiliated in front of his entire medical staff had discovered evidence of 17 preventable deaths caused by his cost-cutting protocols. Maya had been living on the streets since losing her medical license for insubordination. But what the medical board had called defiance, Maya called refusing to let patients die for profit. What happened next didn't just destroy Blackwood's career. It exposed a systematic cover-up that reached the highest levels of hospital administration and proved that sometimes the most important medical knowledge comes from those the system has thrown away. This is the story of how a homeless woman with nothing left to lose brought down an entire medical empire, and why you'll never trust hospital administrators the same way again. It's of St. Mary's Hospital's ICU cast harsh shadows across Dr. Richard Blackwood's perfectly pressed Armani suit as he conducted his Monday morning efficiency review. At 52, Blackwood commanded fear rather than respect. His MBA from Wharton carried more weight in hospital boardrooms than his barely passed medical degree from Caribbean Medical University, an institution that specialized in graduating students who couldn't gain admission to American programs. "Bed occupancy rates are down 32% this quarter," Blackwood announced to his trailing entourage of terrified attending physicians, nervous residents, and sycophantic administrators. His voice carried the cold authority of someone who measured human suffering in profit margins and patient deaths in insurance reimbursement schedules. "We need faster patient turnover. Discharge protocols should prioritize insurance coverage timelines, not sentimental attachment to hopeless cases." Dr. Patricia Sullivan, the ICU's head nurse for 23 years, felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread. Blackwood's efficiency reviews invariably resulted in policies that made her job harder and patient care more dangerous. Speaking against his directives was career suicide. She'd watched 5 experienced nurses transferred to night shifts in the psychiatric ward for questioning his cost-cutting protocols. Behind Blackwood walked Dr. James Patterson, a 20-year veteran who had learned to keep his head down and follow administrative orders without question. His medical instincts regularly conflicted with Blackwood's efficiency requirements, but mortgage payments and college tuition for his 2 daughters made rebellion impossible. He'd watched too many good doctors lose their positions for prioritizing patient care over administrative metrics. Dr. Kevin Rodriguez, a second-year resident from Northwestern Medical School, struggled with the growing disconnect between his medical education and daily practice reality. He'd entered medicine to save lives, but Blackwood's protocols seemed designed to maximize profits while minimizing actual healing. Every patient interaction had become a careful balance between providing adequate care and meeting efficiency targets that often conflicted with medical best practices. That's when Blackwood saw her. A black woman, maybe 35, sitting beside bed 12, where Mrs. Eleanor Thompson lay unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. The woman's clothes were worn but clean, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and most offensive to Blackwood's carefully cultivated image of institutional prestige. She was clearly homeless, obviously poor, and absolutely not supposed to be in his pristine ICU during non-visiting hours. "Excuse me," Blackwood's voice cut through the mechanical hum of life support equipment like a scalpel through flesh. "Visiting hours ended 2 hours ago. You need to leave immediately." Maya Williams looked up from the medical chart she'd been studying with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what the numbers meant. Her dark eyes met Blackwood's pale blue ones, with the kind of direct gaze that he wasn't accustomed to receiving from people of her apparent social status. The chart in her hands contained medication dosages, lab results, and treatment protocols that she'd been analyzing with professional precision for the past hour. "Mrs. Thompson's antibiotic dosage is incorrect," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone with extensive medical training. Her creatinine levels indicate severely compromised kidney function. The current dosage will cause renal failure within 48 hours unless immediately adjusted to account for her diminished clearance capacity. The statement hit the assembled medical professionals like a physical blow, not because it was wrong, but because the homeless woman had just demonstrated more diagnostic insight than anyone else in the room had shown during 3 days of medical rounds. Dr. Patterson felt his blood pressure spike as he realized that the lab results he'd been reviewing for days had indeed shown declining kidney function that the team had attributed to normal post-operative recovery rather than medication toxicity. Blackwood's face flushed red with the kind of rage that came from being challenged by someone he considered inherently inferior. His entire authority structure depended on maintaining clear hierarchies between medical professionals and non-medical individuals, between those with institutional credentials and those without formal recognition. "Security!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the ICU's sterile walls, with enough force to make several patients' family members in nearby rooms look up in alarm. "Remove this vagrant immediately. She's contaminating our environment and interfering with patient care." 2 security guards materialized within seconds, their hands already reaching for Maya's shoulders. Marcus Thompson and David Rodriguez, both men who had worked hospital security for over a decade, recognized the routine of removing undesirable individuals from patient care areas. But they also noticed something unusual. The homeless woman wasn't showing signs of mental illness, substance abuse, or aggressive behavior that typically characterized people who needed forcible removal from hospital premises. Maya didn't resist. Instead, she carefully folded the handwritten notes she'd been taking and slipped them into a worn leather portfolio that had seen better days. The portfolio contained 8 months of documentation that would ultimately destroy careers and transform American healthcare. But to the security guards, it appeared to be the kind of random paperwork that homeless individuals often carried as symbols of past lives. "Dr. Blackwood," Maya said, her voice maintaining professional composure despite the obvious threat of physical removal, "Mrs. Thompson's creatinine clearance is 34 ml/min. Normal range for her age and body weight is 90-120 ml/min. Her current antibiotic protocol will destroy what kidney function she has left within the next 48 hours. Thus, how dare you use medical terminology like you understand it?" Blackwood grabbed Maya's arm himself, his manicured fingers digging into her flesh, hard enough to leave bruises that would be photographed by FBI investigators within 24 hours. "I don't know what internet medical site you've been reading, but this is a real hospital, with real doctors making real decisions based on actual medical education." The gathered medical staff watched in uncomfortable silence as their chief administrator physically manhandled a homeless woman in front of patients and families. "Doctor," Sullivan pulled out her phone to document what was clearly an inappropriate use of force, understanding that such behavior violated hospital policies regarding treatment of visitors and potential patients. Several residents exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing discomfort with Blackwood's increasingly authoritarian management style. "Doctor." Rodriguez felt his medical conscience warring with career preservation instincts as he watched the homeless woman being assaulted for providing what sounded like accurate medical observations. His residency training had emphasized the importance of listening to all sources of patient information, including family members and caregivers who might notice symptoms that medical professionals missed during brief patient interactions. Maya allowed herself to be dragged toward the ICU exit, but her voice remained steady as she called back to the medical team with information that would haunt them for the next 48 hours. "Check her labs in 12 hours. When her kidney function deteriorates exactly as I predicted, remember this moment. Remember that you watched someone who could have saved her get thrown out for being poor." The ICU doors swung shut behind her with finality that felt like judgment itself, but Maya Williams had accomplished exactly what she'd intended, documenting another example of medical negligence while establishing her credibility with potential witnesses, who would soon understand that her homeless appearance concealed expertise that surpassed their formally educated medical team. Maya sat on a bench in St. Mary's main lobby, her worn backpack containing more evidence than Blackwood could have imagined in his worst nightmares. Hidden inside were 8 months of meticulously documented medical records. photographed protocol violations, and evidence of cost-cutting measures that had transformed patient care into profit extraction. The lobby bustled with typical hospital activity: families visiting patients, medical staff changing shifts, administrators conducting business that determined life and death through financial spreadsheets. Dr. Kevin Rodriguez, the second-year resident who had witnessed the ICU confrontation, approached hesitantly. The young doctor's face showed the kind of moral conflict that came from watching injustice while feeling powerless to stop it. His medical school training had emphasized patient advocacy and ethical practice, but his residency experience had taught him that challenging administrative authority was career suicide. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being observed by hospital administrators who might report his interaction with the woman Blackwood had just forcibly removed. "What, Doctor?" "Blackwood did was completely inappropriate. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention for your arm?" Maya studied his face with the analytical precision of someone who had learned to distinguish between genuine concern and professional curiosity. After 8 months of being invisible to hospital staff, someone was finally treating her like a human being, rather than a problem to be removed from sterile environments. "Dr. Rodriguez," Maya said, using his name with casual familiarity that made him step back in surprise. "How long have you been working under Blackwood's efficiency protocols?" "About 6 months," Rodriguez replied, startled that the homeless woman knew his name and seemed familiar with hospital terminology. "How did you know my name? Have we met before?" "Because I've been documenting this hospital's systematic negligence for 8 months, Maya interrupted, opening her backpack to reveal a collection of medical files that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. "And I've been waiting for someone on the medical staff to care more about patient safety than career advancement." Rodriguez stared at the files with growing amazement. The handwriting was precise and professional. Medical terminology was used correctly and appropriately. Diagnostic notes showed sophisticated understanding of complex conditions, and the organization suggested someone with extensive clinical experience rather than internet-acquired medical knowledge. Maya pulled out what appeared to be a damaged medical school diploma, the plastic covering cracked, but the gold embossing still clearly readable. "Dr. Maya Williams, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Doctor of Medicine, magna cum laude, class rank 3 of 127. "You're a Johns Hopkins graduate?" Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible in the busy lobby as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. "Former surgical resident, specialized in trauma surgery and emergency medicine," Maya confirmed, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone whose credentials had been earned through academic excellence rather than family connections or financial advantage. "Until I made the mistake of believing that medical ethics were more important than hospital politics." She opened another section of her portfolio, revealing documentation that made Rodriguez's hands tremble as he read: medication errors that had killed patients, surgical shortcuts that had caused preventable complications, financial incentives that encouraged doctors to prioritize profit over proper care, and administrative pressure to discharge patients prematurely, regardless of medical stability. The evidence was overwhelming and professionally documented, showing a pattern of systematic negligence that went far beyond individual medical errors. Rodriguez recognized names of patients he'd treated, cases where he'd felt uncomfortable with administrative pressure to prioritize efficiency over effectiveness, and situations where his medical instincts had conflicted with cost-cutting protocols. "Rodriguez," Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated grief and professional frustration, "how many patients have you watched die from conditions that could have been treated with proper protocols if cost considerations hadn't overridden medical judgment?" The question hit him like a physical blow because the answer was too many to count comfortably. He'd entered medicine to save lives, but increasingly found himself participating in a system that seemed designed to maximize profits while providing minimal effective care. 3 years ago, Maya began, her voice carrying trauma that time hadn't healed despite intensive therapy and grief counseling, "I was a surgical resident here at St. Mary's. Top 5% of my class, excellent clinical evaluations, publishing research in peer-reviewed journals, on track for chief residency with letters of recommendation from department heads." Rodriguez leaned forward, understanding that he was about to hear something that would fundamentally change his perspective on everything he thought he knew about the hospital where he worked and the administrators who controlled patient care decisions. My sister Zara Williams, 26 years old, elementary school teacher with no medical history, came to the emergency room with classic appendicitis symptoms. Standard protocol called for immediate surgical intervention, followed by routine post-operative monitoring. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she opened a medical file marked Zara Williams Preventable Death, Case Study in Administrative Negligence. But Dr. Blackwood had recently implemented new efficiency protocols designed to maximize bed turnover and minimize operational costs, cheaper anesthesia with higher allergic reaction rates but lower pharmaceutical expenses, reduced surgical staffing to handle more procedures with fewer personnel, shortened post-operative monitoring to push patients through recovery faster and increase bed availability for new admissions. Rodriguez felt sick as he realized where the story was leading and recognized similar protocols that had been implemented during his residency training. The administrative pressure to handle more patients with fewer resources had become so normalized that he'd stopped questioning whether such efficiency improvements compromised patient safety. Zara had an allergic reaction to the cheaper anesthesia during surgery, a reaction that would have been prevented with standard preoperative allergy testing that Blackwood had eliminated to save time and money. The reduced surgical staff missed early warning signs because they were managing too many procedures simultaneously with inadequate support. When she went into cardiac arrest during recovery, she was alone. The shortened monitoring protocols meant nurses were checking on patients every 2 hours instead of every 30 minutes, as medical standards required. Maya's voice broke slightly as she continued with details that had been seared into her memory through 3 years of reliving the preventable tragedy. By the time someone found her, she'd been in cardiac arrest for over 90 minutes. Brain death from oxygen deprivation. My sister died because Richard Blackwood decided that saving $300 per surgery was more important than patient safety. What did you do when you discovered the connection between the protocols and your sister's death? I filed formal complaints through every proper institutional channel available to medical professionals, documented the protocol violations with photographic evidence, gathered witness testimony from surgical staff, followed hospital procedures for reporting medical malpractice. Her voice grew harder with each word as she described the institutional response to her sister's death. Blackwood had me fired for insubordination within 2 weeks of filing the complaint. He filed counter-complaints with the medical board, claiming that I was emotionally compromised by personal loss and unable to maintain professional objectivity necessary for safe medical practice. Rodriguez felt his world shifting as he understood the implications. They took your medical license for reporting malpractice? The medical board sided with Blackwood because he had political connections and institutional support, while I was just a resident who had lost her sister and was making accusations that threatened hospital profitability. Maya's eyes flashed with the kind of anger that came from systematic betrayal by institutions that were supposed to protect patients and support ethical medical practice. Without a medical license, I couldn't get work in healthcare anywhere in the United States. Without income, I couldn't afford rent on my apartment. Without an address, I couldn't get work in other fields that required background checks or professional references. Blackwood didn't just kill my sister. He destroyed my entire life for having the audacity to report his negligence through proper channels. So, you became homeless as a direct result of reporting medical malpractice? Maya nodded, her expression showing the complex emotions of someone who had lost everything for trying to do the right thing. I've been living on the streets for 8 months, but I've also been conducting the most comprehensive investigation of medical malpractice that's ever been attempted by someone with both clinical expertise and unlimited time to observe hospital operations from the outside. What kind of investigation? Maya opened another section of her portfolio, revealing 8 months of documented deaths that could have been prevented with proper protocols. 17 families have lost loved ones to Blackwood's cost-cutting measures. I've been documenting every case, gathering evidence and building a federal case against systematic medical negligence that reaches far beyond individual hospitals. Rodriguez stared at the documentation, recognizing the scope of evidence that would be necessary for federal prosecution of healthcare fraud. You're building a federal case. Dr. Rodriguez, what I'm about to show you will prove that Richard Blackwood isn't just cutting costs to improve hospital efficiency. He's committing organized fraud against Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance companies by billing for standard care while intentionally providing substandard treatment that maximizes profits through patient deaths. Maya pulled out documents that made Rodriguez's blood run cold. Billing records that showed charges for procedures that weren't performed according to medical standards, medication costs for drugs that weren't administered in proper dosages, and staffing claims for medical personnel who weren't present during critical care situations. "This isn't just malpractice," Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible as he processed the scope of systematic fraud. "This is organized healthcare fraud involving false billing, Medicare fraud, and conspiracy to commit negligent homicide. 8 months ago," Maya continued, "I was contacted by Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. They'd received anonymous tips about systematic billing fraud at multiple hospitals and needed someone with medical expertise to conduct undercover surveillance." Maya opened her laptop and displayed official FBI credentials that made Rodriguez's hands shake. Maya Williams, consulting medical expert, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Healthcare Fraud Task Force, Special Consultant for Medical Negligence Investigations. "You're working for the FBI?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying disbelief as he processed that the homeless woman he'd watched being assaulted was actually a federal investigator. "I volunteered for the investigation," Maya corrected. "When the Bureau learned about my sister's death and Blackwood's role in covering up medical malpractice, they offered me a chance to gather evidence that could prevent other families from experiencing what mine went through." Maya opened another file that revealed the true scope of the investigation. 17 hospitals in 6 states, coordinated billing fraud estimated at over $200 million annually, systematic reduction of care standards to maximize profit margins while maintaining insurance reimbursement rates designed for proper medical care. Blackwood is running a nationwide operation. He's the architect of a healthcare fraud network that extends across multiple states and involves dozens of hospital administrators, insurance executives, and government officials, Maya confirmed. Blackwood developed the efficiency protocols that hospitals across the country have adopted through his consulting company. He personally profits from teaching administrators how to maximize revenues while minimizing actual medical care. Rodriguez felt overwhelmed by the scope of corruption that Maya was revealing. How many patients have died because of these protocols? Maya's expression grew grave as she opened a file marked Preventable Deaths, Statistical Analysis. The spreadsheet contained names, dates, hospitals, and causes of death that painted a horrifying picture of systematic medical negligence disguised as efficiency improvements. Conservative estimate based on mortality rate changes after protocol implementation. 847 preventable deaths in the past 3 years across the hospital network. Patients who died from complications that would have been avoided with standard care protocols that Blackwood eliminated to save money. "And you've been documenting all of this as an FBI consultant?" "Every case, every protocol violation, every financial incentive that prioritized profit over patient care, every administrative decision that resulted in preventable patient deaths." Maya turned her laptop so Rodriguez could see months of meticulous federal investigation. But documentation isn't enough for successful prosecution. We need witnesses from inside the medical system willing to testify about what they've observed. Rodriguez understood why Maya was revealing this information to him. "You want me to become a federal witness against my own hospital? I want you to help save lives by providing testimony that could shut down a healthcare fraud network that's killing patients for profit," Maya replied. "Mrs. Thompson's case proves that Blackwood's protocols are actively killing patients in real time, and you're in a position to document the systematic negligence that's disguised as efficiency improvement." Rodriguez thought about every patient he'd treated, according to protocols that seemed designed to minimize care rather than optimize healing. "What would I need to do as a federal witness?" "Document everything you observe that prioritizes cost over patient safety. Protocol violations that increase medical risks, administrative pressure to discharge patients prematurely, financial incentives that reward quantity over quality of care." Maya pulled out official federal witness protection documentation. The FBI provides legal protection and financial support for medical professionals willing to testify against healthcare fraud. But before Rodriguez could respond, Maya's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Agent Mitchell. Blackwood discovered your real identity through facial recognition. Hospital security is actively searching for you. Immediate extraction necessary. Maya's blood ran cold as she realized that her 8 months of undercover investigation had been compromised at the worst possible moment. Blackwood had just discovered that the homeless woman he'd assaulted was actually an FBI consultant investigating healthcare fraud, and hospital security was actively hunting for someone who had enough evidence to destroy his entire criminal network. Back at St. Mary's Hospital, Dr. Blackwood stood in his corner office, reviewing security footage from the morning's ICU incident, with the cold analytical precision of someone whose career depended on controlling information and eliminating threats to his criminal enterprise. His face grew increasingly pale as he recognized details that should have been impossible. The homeless woman had been reading medical charts with the fluency of someone with extensive clinical training, taking notes with professional precision, and asking questions that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of complex medical protocols. "Run facial recognition on this woman immediately," he ordered Marcus Thompson, his head of security and the only employee who knew the full extent of Blackwood's fraudulent activities. "I want to know who she is, where she came from, and why she was interested in our patient files." 20 minutes later, Thompson returned with printouts that made Blackwood's hands tremble with recognition and terror. Dr. Maya Williams, former surgical resident at St. Mary's Hospital, Johns Hopkins Medical School graduate, medical license revoked 3 years ago for filing unsubstantiated accusations against hospital administration. Unsubstantiated accusations about what specific incidents? Medical malpractice complaints related to patient death during routine surgical procedure. Subject claimed hospital protocols violated standard care requirements and directly caused preventable death. Thompson paused before delivering the information that would change everything. "Sir, there's additional information. Current FBI database shows Dr. Williams as a consulting expert for federal healthcare fraud investigations." Blackwood felt the world tilt beneath his feet as the full implications became clear. The homeless woman he'd physically assaulted in front of his entire medical staff was actually an FBI consultant investigating healthcare fraud. Every protocol he'd implemented, every cost-cutting measure he'd celebrated, every administrative decision he'd made to maximize profits at the expense of patient care, all of it had been documented by federal investigators for the past 8 months. "Find her immediately," Blackwood said, his voice tight with panic as he realized that his criminal enterprise was about to be exposed by someone with both medical expertise and federal authority. "Search every floor of this hospital. Check security cameras in all public areas. Contact our legal department. We may have a federal investigation problem that requires immediate damage control." Thompson began coordinating a hospital-wide search, while Blackwood started making phone calls to criminal defense attorneys who specialized in healthcare fraud cases. But Maya Williams was already 3 steps ahead of both of them. At Rosewood Coffee, 3 blocks from St. Mary's Hospital, Maya quickly packed her laptop while explaining the deteriorating situation to Rodriguez. "Blackwood just discovered my real identity through facial recognition software. Hospital security will be actively searching for me within the next 30 minutes. What does that mean for you as a federal investigator? It means my undercover investigation is compromised, but it also means we have maybe 6 hours before Blackwood starts destroying evidence and intimidating staff members who might cooperate with federal prosecutors." Maya handed Rodriguez a business card with FBI contact information. "Agent Mitchell is expecting your call within the next 2 hours. She'll provide immediate protection if you're willing to testify about what you've witnessed." Rodriguez looked at the card, understanding that his next decision would define not just his medical career, but his integrity as a healthcare professional. "If I become a federal witness, what happens to patient care at the hospital during the investigation?" "Patient care improves dramatically under federal oversight," Maya replied. "Federal investigators ensure that medical decisions are made based on clinical necessity rather than financial considerations. The protocols that killed my sister get replaced with evidence-based standards that actually protect patients rather than maximizing profits. Rodriguez thought about every patient he'd watched receive substandard care because administrative protocols prioritized efficiency over effectiveness. I became a doctor to help people, not to participate in a profit extraction scheme disguised as healthcare. Maya smiled for the first time since her sister's death as she realized that her investigation was finally producing the witnesses necessary for successful prosecution. Agent Mitchell will contact you within 2 hours with specific instructions for documenting evidence and protecting yourself from administrative retaliation. As Maya prepared to leave, Rodriguez asked the question that had been troubling him since their conversation began. Why did you choose to become homeless instead of just cooperating with the FBI investigation from a distance? Maya's expression grew distant as she considered how to explain the transformation that had shaped her understanding of healthcare justice. Because I needed to understand what happens to patients when the medical system fails them completely. Living on the streets taught me that healthcare isn't just about medical procedures, it's about dignity, respect, and treating people like human beings regardless of their economic status or social position. And what did you learn during 8 months of homelessness? I learned that the patients Blackwood considers hopeless cases often recover completely when they receive proper care and attention. I learned that the efficiency improvements he promotes actually create more complications that require more expensive treatments. And I learned that sometimes the most important medical insights come from people the system has abandoned. Maya stood to leave, then turned back with one final piece of information that would transform Rodriguez's understanding of the crisis they were facing. Mrs. Thompson isn't the only patient in immediate danger from Blackwood's protocol. There are at least 12 other patients currently receiving care that will kill them unless proper medical standards are immediately implemented. 12 hours after Maya's forcible removal from the ICU, Mrs. Thompson's condition deteriorated exactly as predicted, with clinical precision that made her medical team question everything they thought they knew about diagnostic expertise. Dr. Patterson stood beside her bed at 3 a.m., staring at lab results that confirmed every detail of the homeless woman's analysis. Her creatinine levels have spiked to 4.2 mmol, Dr. Patterson announced to Nurse Sullivan, who had requested the emergency labs after noticing changes in Mrs. Thompson's condition. That's more than triple the normal range and indicates severe kidney dysfunction. These numbers are exactly what that woman predicted 12 hours ago, Sullivan replied, her voice carrying the uncomfortable recognition that someone without official credentials had demonstrated superior diagnostic abilities to their entire medical team. Dr. Rodriguez arrived for his night shift rotation and immediately reviewed Mrs. Thompson's deteriorating condition. We need to adjust her antibiotic dosage immediately and implement kidney protection protocols. Her renal function is failing exactly as the homeless woman warned it would. What homeless woman? Dr. Patterson asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The woman Dr. Blackwood had forcibly removed from the ICU this morning. She said Mrs. Thompson's kidney function would fail within 48 hours if we didn't adjust her medication dosage to account for her compromised renal clearance. Patterson's voice carried the growing realization that administrative authority had overruled medical accuracy with potentially fatal consequences. As the medical team worked to correct Mrs. Thompson's treatment protocol, Rodriguez discreetly documented the incident for his upcoming testimony to federal investigators. The case provided perfect evidence of how Blackwood's cost-cutting measures had nearly killed a patient who could have been successfully treated with proper medical standards. In the hospital lobby, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. You were completely right about Mrs. Thompson. Kidney function failed exactly as you predicted. Medical team is implementing emergency protocols to prevent permanent damage. How did you know when our entire team missed the diagnosis? Maya replied, because I reviewed her lab results without considering cost factors or administrative pressure to minimize treatment expenses. When medical decisions are made based on clinical evidence rather than financial constraints, diagnostic accuracy improves dramatically. Rodriguez. Agent Mitchell contacted me. Meeting tomorrow to discuss federal witness testimony. What should I expect? Maya. Bring documentation of every case where administrative protocols conflicted with proper medical care. Agent Mitchell will provide legal protection and help you understand how your testimony can prevent other patients from experiencing what Mrs. Thompson went through. But what Rodriguez didn't understand was that Mrs. Thompson's case was just the beginning of a medical crisis that would expose the full scope of Blackwood's criminal network. The next morning, Agent Sarah Mitchell arrived at St. Mary's Hospital with a team of federal investigators and a warrant to seize medical records related to the healthcare fraud investigation. What they found exceeded even Maya's extensive documentation, a systematic pattern of medical negligence that had transformed patient care into organized profit extraction. Dr. Rodriguez and Nurse Sullivan met with Agent Mitchell in a secure conference room, where they provided testimony that corroborated every aspect of Maya's 8-month investigation. The federal investigators had prepared specific questions based on Maya's evidence, and the witness testimony provided perfect legal support for criminal prosecution. Dr. Blackwood implemented protocols that prioritized bed turnover over patient recovery, Rodriguez testified. Medical staff were encouraged to discharge patients as quickly as possible, regardless of their medical stability, to maximize insurance reimbursements while minimizing operational costs. Can you provide specific examples of patients who were harmed by these protocols? Agent Mitchell asked. Rodriguez opened a file he'd been preparing since his conversation with Maya. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's kidney failure was entirely preventable with proper medication management. James Anderson died from post-surgical complications that would have been avoided with standard monitoring protocols. Sarah Martinez suffered permanent disability from infections that developed because antibiotic protocols were changed to use cheaper drugs with lower effectiveness rates. Nurse Sullivan provided evidence that was even more damning from an operational perspective. Nursing staff ratios were reduced to dangerous levels that made adequate patient monitoring impossible. Medication protocols were changed to use pharmaceutical options that had higher complication rates but lower acquisition costs. Post-operative monitoring was shortened to increase surgical volume regardless of patient recovery needs. Agent Mitchell reviewed their testimony against Maya's documented evidence, finding perfect correlation between witness observations and investigative findings. How many patients would you estimate have been affected by these protocol changes over the past 3 years? Every patient admitted to this hospital has received substandard care designed to maximize profit rather than promote healing, Sullivan replied. The question isn't how many patients were affected. It's how many patients died from preventable complications caused by administrative decisions that prioritized financial returns over medical outcomes. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Mitchell showed them financial records seized from Blackwood's office during the morning raids. Dr. Blackwood received performance bonuses based on cost reductions and efficiency improvements. His personal compensation increased by 340% over 3 years, directly correlated with reductions in patient care standards. Rodriguez felt physically sick as he processed the implications. He was personally profiting from patient deaths. According to these financial records, Dr. Blackwood's consulting company has been hired by 17 hospitals across 6 states to implement identical efficiency protocols, Agent Mitchell explained. He's been systematically degrading healthcare quality across multiple institutions while building personal wealth from patient suffering. The scope of the criminal conspiracy was staggering. A coordinated network of hospital administrators who had prioritized profit over patient care, resulting in hundreds of preventable deaths and millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance billing. "Where is Dr. Williams now?" Sullivan asked, concerned about Maya's safety now that her federal investigation role had been exposed. Agent Mitchell smiled grimly. "Dr. Williams is presenting evidence to a federal grand jury this afternoon. Her testimony will result in indictments for conspiracy, healthcare fraud, Medicare fraud, and negligent homicide." But what none of them knew was that Maya had discovered evidence of corruption that reached far beyond Dr. Blackwood's criminal network. Documentation that implicated government officials, insurance executives, and pharmaceutical companies in a conspiracy that had transformed American healthcare into a profit extraction industry. In a secure federal facility in downtown Chicago, Maya Williams stood before a federal grand jury. and revealed the full scope of a healthcare fraud conspiracy that challenged fundamental assumptions about medical care, government oversight, and corporate responsibility in American healthcare systems. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had sacrificed everything for medical truth, "what I'm about to present represents the systematic transformation of American healthcare from a healing profession into a profit extraction industry that views patient deaths as acceptable costs of maximizing financial returns." On the screen behind her appeared a network diagram showing connections between hospital administrators, insurance executives, pharmaceutical companies, government regulators, and consulting firms, all coordinating to reduce patient care standards while maintaining insurance reimbursement rates designed for proper medical treatment. Dr. Blackwood didn't operate alone or develop his protocols independently. He was part of a coordinated network that includes 17 hospital systems, 4 major insurance companies, 3 pharmaceutical corporations, and corrupt officials in the Department of Health and Human Services who approved protocol changes they knew would increase patient mortality. The grand jury members leaned forward as Maya presented evidence that challenged everything they believed about healthcare regulation, government oversight, and corporate accountability in medical care systems. Insurance companies provided financial incentives for hospitals to implement efficiency protocols that reduced care standards while maintaining premium reimbursement rates. Pharmaceutical companies offered volume discounts for using medications with higher complication rates but lower manufacturing costs. Government regulators approved these changes without conducting safety reviews because they held financial interests in the companies that benefited from reduced care standards. Maya opened a file that made several grand jury members gasp audibly. This conspiracy has resulted in an estimated 400 preventable deaths over 3 years, while generating over $500 million in fraudulent profits distributed among conspirators who viewed patient mortality as an acceptable cost of maximizing financial returns. Maya opened another file containing the most damning evidence of all: recorded conversations between Blackwood and his co-conspirators discussing how to hide patient mortality statistics from federal regulators, insurance executives calculating the profitability of reduced care standards, and hospital administrators celebrating increased profit margins despite documented increases in preventable death rates. "My sister Zara wasn't killed by medical error or individual negligence," Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion as she addressed the fundamental nature of the conspiracy. "She was murdered by a coordinated criminal enterprise that viewed her life as acceptable collateral damage in a systematic profit maximization scheme designed to extract wealth from human suffering." The recorded conversations played through the federal facility's sound system, revealing the callous indifference of medical administrators who discussed patient deaths in terms of acceptable loss ratios and profit margin improvements. Blackwood's voice was clearly audible. "The mortality rate increase is within acceptable parameters, as long as our cost savings exceed liability exposure." Maya presented financial evidence showing how the conspiracy operated. Hospital administrators received performance bonuses based on cost reductions that directly correlated with patient deaths. Insurance executives earned commissions for implementing coverage restrictions that denied necessary care. Pharmaceutical companies increased profits by manufacturing medications that were cheaper to produce but less effective for patient treatment. The grand jury's faces showed growing horror as they understood the scope of systematic healthcare fraud that had transformed medical institutions into profit extraction machines disguised as healing centers. "But the most shocking evidence proves that this conspiracy is ongoing and immediate," Maya continued, pulling up current patient files from hospitals across the network. "There are patients receiving substandard care right now who will die from preventable complications unless federal intervention occurs within the next 48 hours. Maya displayed real-time medical data showing patients whose conditions were deteriorating because of cost-cutting protocols identical to those that had killed her sister. Mrs. Thompson's case at St. Mary's Hospital was not an isolated incident. It's part of a systematic pattern of medical negligence that continues to claim new victims every day. The conspiracy remains operational. The grand jury voted unanimously to recommend federal indictments for conspiracy, healthcare fraud, Medicare fraud, racketeering, and negligent homicide. The charges would span multiple states and include government officials, corporate executives, and hospital administrators who had participated in transforming healthcare into organized crime. But Maya's most dangerous revelation was yet to come. Evidence that the conspiracy included current members of Congress who had blocked healthcare reform legislation while profiting from the very medical fraud that was killing their constituents. At 6 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning, federal agents simultaneously executed search warrants at 17 hospitals, 4 insurance companies, 3 pharmaceutical corporations, and 12 government offices in what would become the largest healthcare fraud investigation in American history. Maya Williams accompanied the FBI team returning to St. Mary's Hospital, not as a homeless woman seeking information, but as an official federal consultant armed with arrest warrants for conspiracy, fraud, and negligent homicide. Dr. Blackwood was conducting his morning efficiency review when his assistant burst into the ICU with panic distorting her carefully composed professional demeanor. "Doctor Blackwood, there are federal agents in the lobby with arrest warrants, and that homeless woman from yesterday, she's with them, wearing an FBI consultant badge and carrying federal documentation." Blackwood felt his carefully constructed world collapse as he realized that every protocol he'd implemented, every cost-cutting measure he'd celebrated, every administrative decision designed to maximize profits had been documented by federal investigators working with someone who possessed both medical expertise and unlimited access to observe his criminal operations. Dr. Richard Blackwood. Agent Mitchell's voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement as she approached with arrest warrant and backup agents positioned throughout the ICU. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, Medicare fraud, racketeering and negligent homicide. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But before Agent Mitchell could finish reading his Miranda rights, Maya stepped forward to address the medical staff who had gathered to witness their administrator's arrest with a mixture of satisfaction, vindication, and professional curiosity. "My name is Dr. Maya Williams," she announced, her voice carrying throughout the ICU with the authority of someone whose credentials had been earned through both academic excellence and personal sacrifice. 3 years ago, my sister Zara died in this hospital from preventable complications caused by cost-cutting protocols that prioritized profit margins over patient safety. For the past 8 months, I've been conducting a federal investigation of systematic medical negligence that has killed hundreds of patients across 17 hospitals in 6 states. Dr. Rodriguez and Nurse Sullivan stood with the gathered medical staff, watching justice finally arrive for patients who had suffered from administrative negligence, disguised as efficiency improvements and operational streamlining. Every patient currently receiving care in this hospital has been treated according to protocols designed to maximize insurance reimbursements rather than promote healing and recovery. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger as she addressed colleagues who had been forced to compromise their medical ethics by administrative pressure. "Starting immediately, all medical decisions will be made according to evidence-based standards that prioritize patient outcomes over financial considerations." As federal agents led Blackwood away in handcuffs, his face showing the stunned disbelief of someone who had believed himself immune from consequences, Maya turned to address Mrs. Thompson's medical team with information that would transform their understanding of proper patient care. Mrs. Thompson's kidney failure was entirely preventable, and her recovery depends on immediate implementation of proper treatment protocols that should have been standard care from the beginning of her hospitalization, Maya explained, reviewing the patient's chart with the clinical precision that had initially exposed Blackwood's negligence. Dr. Patterson, who had witnessed Maya's accurate prediction about Mrs. Thompson's deterioration and felt guilty about dismissing her initial observations, stepped forward with professional humility. "Dr. Williams, we request your consultation on her case and guidance for implementing proper medical protocols. Your diagnostic insights could save her life and help us understand how to provide appropriate care for other patients." Maya nodded, understanding that her return to St. Mary's Hospital represented more than personal vindication. It was the beginning of systematic healthcare reform that would restore medical integrity to institutions corrupted by profit-driven administration and corporate influence. Within hours of Blackwood's arrest, Maya Williams found herself in the unprecedented position of leading comprehensive medical reform at the hospital where her sister had died, and she had lost her medical career for reporting institutional negligence. Federal oversight required immediate implementation of evidence-based protocols that prioritized patient outcomes over administrative efficiency and profit maximization. Mrs. Thompson's treatment protocol requires complete revision, based on proper medical standards. Maya explained to the assembled medical team that now included doctors, nurses, residents, and administrators who were learning to practice healthcare according to clinical evidence rather than cost considerations. Her kidney function can be restored with appropriate medication management, adequate hydration protocols, and monitoring standards that should have been implemented from the beginning of her treatment. Dr. Rodriguez watched Maya work with the kind of clinical precision and patient-focused attention that reminded him why he'd chosen medicine as a profession before administrative pressure had forced him to compromise his medical ethics for career preservation. How do we prevent other patients from experiencing similar complications caused by the protocols we've been forced to follow? Rodriguez asked, recognizing that Maya's expertise could transform how they approached patient care throughout the hospital. By implementing the evidence-based medical standards that Blackwood systematically eliminated to reduce operational costs, Maya replied, accessing patient files on the ICU's computer system with federal authorization to review and modify treatment protocols. Standard nursing ratios that ensure adequate patient monitoring, proper medication protocols that prioritize clinical effectiveness over pharmaceutical costs, post-operative care that continues until patients achieve actual medical stability rather than administrative discharge criteria designed to maximize bed turnover. Nurse Sullivan felt a psychological weight lifting from her shoulders as she realized that patient care was finally being prioritized over administrative metrics and efficiency requirements that had forced her to compromise professional standards she'd maintained for over 20 years. Dr. Williams, how many other patients currently in the hospital are receiving substandard care because of Blackwood's cost-cutting protocols? Sullivan asked, understanding that the systematic negligence extended far beyond Mrs. Thompson's case. Maya's expression grew serious as she reviewed patient files throughout the hospital using federal access credentials that allowed comprehensive analysis of treatment patterns and outcomes. 43 patients currently admitted are receiving care that falls below evidence-based medical standards. 12 are in immediate danger of preventable complications similar to Mrs. Thompson's kidney failure. 3 require emergency intervention to prevent death from administrative negligence that has been disguised as standard operating procedures. The scope of the medical crisis was staggering, but Maya had spent 8 months preparing for this moment by studying every aspect of proper medical care that had been compromised by Blackwood's profit-driven protocols. We need to conduct immediate triage of every patient according to actual medical need rather than insurance reimbursement schedules and discharge timing designed to maximize bed availability, Maya explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood both clinical medicine and healthcare fraud. Medical discharge decisions should be made by physicians based on patient recovery status, not by administrators based on bed turnover requirements and profit optimization. As Maya worked systematically to implement proper medical protocols throughout the hospital, something remarkable began to happen that validated everything she had documented during her federal investigation. Patient outcomes improved dramatically within the first 24 hours of evidence-based care implementation. Proper medication management reduced complications that had been accepted as normal under Blackwood's protocols. Adequate nursing ratios allowed early detection and prevention of problems that had previously been discovered only after becoming life-threatening. Evidence-based treatment standards promoted actual healing rather than prolonging profitable illness through substandard care that required extended hospitalization. Dr. Williams, Dr. Patterson said during evening rounds, his voice carrying professional amazement as he reviewed patient progress under proper medical protocols. Mrs. Thompson's kidney function is improving faster than anyone expected given the severity of her condition 12 hours ago. Her recovery is proceeding exactly according to the clinical timeline you predicted, when evidence-based treatment replaced cost-cutting protocols. Maya felt deep satisfaction not in being proven correct, but in witnessing patient care finally being delivered according to medical standards rather than administrative convenience and profit maximization that had transformed healing institutions into business enterprises. The transformation at St. Mary's Hospital represented just the beginning of nationwide healthcare reform, triggered by Maya's 8-month federal investigation that had exposed systematic fraud extending across multiple states and involving dozens of institutions. Federal indictments had been issued for administrators at 17 hospitals, 4 insurance executives, 3 pharmaceutical company officers, and government officials who had participated in the systematic degradation of patient care standards for financial profit. Agent Mitchell arrived at the hospital to brief Maya on the broader implications of her investigation and the scope of criminal prosecution that would reshape American healthcare regulation and oversight. Dr. Williams, your documentation has triggered the largest healthcare fraud prosecution in American history, Agent Mitchell announced, reviewing federal cases that had been opened based on Maya's evidence. The conspiracy you exposed extends far beyond individual hospitals to include coordinated efforts by insurance companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and government regulators who prioritized financial returns over patient safety. Maya looked up from the patient files she was reviewing for additional federal evidence, her mind processing the scope of institutional corruption that her sister's death had ultimately revealed. What about the patients and families who lost loved ones to preventable complications caused by this systematic negligence? Will they receive justice and compensation for what they've suffered? The Department of Justice is preparing wrongful death settlements for over 800 families whose loved ones died from protocol violations you documented during your investigation, Agent Mitchell replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of federal prosecutor who had built an unassailable case against systematic healthcare fraud. Total settlement value is estimated at $3 billion, funded by seized assets from the conspirators and criminal organizations that profited from patient deaths. The financial implications were staggering, but Maya understood that monetary compensation couldn't restore the lives lost to administrative greed and corporate indifference to human suffering. What about preventing future conspiracies that could transform other medical institutions into profit extraction enterprises disguised as healthcare providers? Maya asked, recognizing that punishment without systematic reform would only encourage more sophisticated methods of medical fraud. Federal oversight of hospital protocols is being implemented nationwide under new legislation, Agent Mitchell explained, showing Maya draft regulations that would transform how medical care was regulated and monitored. The Zara Williams Patient Protection Act requires that all medical decisions be made according to evidence-based standards rather than administrative efficiency metrics or profit optimization strategies. Maya felt tears building in her eyes as she realized that her sister's death had ultimately led to legal protections that would save thousands of lives and prevent other families from experiencing the systematic medical betrayal that had destroyed her own life. Zara would have wanted her death to prevent other families from going through what we experienced, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years spent transforming personal tragedy into systematic healthcare reform. Dr. Williams, there's something else you need to know, Agent Mitchell continued, her expression showing the kind of professional satisfaction that came from delivering justice after months of investigation. The medical board is formally reviewing your license revocation based on evidence of institutional retaliation for reporting legitimate malpractice. Your medical license will be fully restored with an official apology for the systematic failure that cost you your career for trying to protect patients. Maya had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, but now that professional vindication was finally happening, she felt conflicted about returning to traditional medical practice within institutional healthcare systems. Agent Mitchell, I need to consider what kind of medicine I want to practice, now that I understand how easily medical institutions can be corrupted by profit motives, Maya said, her voice reflecting the complex emotions of someone whose perspective on healthcare had been fundamentally transformed by personal tragedy and federal investigation. What do you mean? Living on the streets for 8 months taught me that the patients traditional healthcare systems abandon often need advocacy and attention more than they need expensive procedures and institutional care, Maya explained, her voice carrying insights that could only come from experiencing both sides of the healthcare divide. I want to create a different kind of medical practice that serves people the system has failed. 6 months after Dr. Blackwood's arrest and conviction, Maya Williams stood before a packed congressional hearing on healthcare reform, invited to testify about systematic medical negligence that had transformed healing institutions into profit extraction machines disguised as healthcare providers. Senators and representatives, Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had sacrificed everything for medical truth and transformed personal tragedy into national healthcare reform. My federal investigation at St. Mary's Hospital revealed a criminal conspiracy that prioritized financial returns over patient outcomes, resulting in hundreds of preventable deaths across 17 hospitals in 6 states. The hearing room was packed with families who had lost loved ones to medical negligence, healthcare workers who had witnessed systematic protocol violations, medical administrators who were learning that their efficiency improvements had actually increased patient mortality, and journalists documenting what would become landmark healthcare legislation. But the most important discovery wasn't the extent of the conspiracy or the number of patients who died from preventable complications, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger as she addressed the fundamental issues that had driven her 8-month investigation. The most important discovery was how easily preventable these deaths were when medical decisions were made, according to evidence-based standards, rather than cost-cutting requirements and profit optimization strategies. Maya opened her laptop to display statistics that made several congressional members lean forward in their chairs with expressions of shock and professional concern. Hospital patient mortality rates decreased by 47% when profit-driven protocols were replaced with evidence-based care standards. Patient recovery times improved by 35% under proper medical protocols. Hospital readmission rates dropped by 52% when discharge decisions were made by physicians based on medical criteria rather than administrators based on bed turnover requirements. Senator Patricia Martinez asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Dr. Williams, how do we prevent future conspiracies from degrading patient care and transforming medical institutions into profit extraction enterprises? Mandatory federal oversight of all hospital protocols with criminal penalties for administrators who implement cost-cutting measures that increase patient mortality, Maya replied, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed the deadly consequences of unregulated healthcare administration. Medical decisions should be made by medical professionals according to evidence-based standards, not by cost accountants according to profit projections and insurance reimbursement optimization. And what about patients who are currently receiving substandard care in hospitals across the country? Maya's expression grew serious as she addressed the core issue that had driven her federal investigation and personal transformation. There are thousands of patients in hospitals across America who are dying from preventable complications because administrative protocols prioritize operational efficiency over medical effectiveness. Every day we delay implementing proper medical standards. More families lose loved ones to systematic negligence that has been normalized as standard healthcare practice. The hearing concluded with unanimous bipartisan support for the Zara Williams Patient Protection Act, comprehensive healthcare reform legislation that would restore medical integrity to American hospitals and establish federal oversight of medical protocols to prevent future systematic fraud. But Maya's most important work was happening outside congressional hearing rooms and federal investigations. In a renovated building 3 blocks from St. Mary's Hospital, Maya had established a medical practice unlike any other in American healthcare. The Williams Clinic provided free medical care to homeless individuals, uninsured families, and patients whose medical needs had been dismissed by traditional healthcare systems that prioritized profitable patients over comprehensive care. Dr. Williams, said Dr. Kevin Rodriguez, the former hospital resident who had joined her practice after providing federal testimony that helped convict Blackwood and his co-conspirators, We've successfully treated over 400 patients in our first 6 months of operation. Patients who were told their conditions were untreatable by institutional medicine are recovering completely with proper attention and evidence-based care. Maya smiled as she reviewed their patient outcomes. Complex diagnoses that other doctors had missed due to time pressure and cost considerations, treatments that traditional medicine had considered too expensive for certain patient populations, and complete recoveries that proved most hopeless cases were actually patients who hadn't received adequate medical attention from practitioners who cared more about efficiency than effectiveness. Dr. Rodriguez, what we've learned is that the most important medical insights often come from patients themselves. If healthcare providers are willing to listen without being constrained by administrative pressure and profit optimization requirements, Maya observed, her voice reflecting wisdom gained through personal tragedy and professional transformation. The Williams Clinic had become a model for patient-centered care that prioritized healing over profit, human dignity over operational efficiency, and medical effectiveness over administrative convenience. Medical schools across the country were studying their methods, and healthcare reformers were using their outcomes data to support legislation that would transform how American medicine approached patient care. On the 3rd anniversary of Zara Williams's death, Maya visited her sister's grave, carrying news that would have made Zara proud. Systematic healthcare reform that had saved thousands of lives, criminal convictions of medical fraud conspirators, and the establishment of federal protections that restored medical integrity to institutions that had been corrupted by profit-driven administration. Zara, Maya whispered to her sister's headstone, her voice carrying 3 years of grief transformed into purposeful action. Your death wasn't meaningless. The federal investigation it inspired has prevented hundreds of other families from experiencing the systematic medical betrayal that destroyed our lives. As Maya knelt beside her sister's grave, her phone buzzed with a message from Agent Mitchell. Dr. Williams, we have evidence of another healthcare conspiracy in Miami. 3 hospitals, systematic protocol violations, estimated 200 preventable deaths over 18 months. Federal investigation authorized. Are you available for consultation? Maya looked at the message, then at her sister's grave, understanding that her work was far from finished. As long as healthcare systems prioritized profit over patients and administrators valued efficiency over ethics, there would be families like hers who needed someone willing to fight for medical truth and patient advocacy. I kept my promise, Zara, Maya said softly, her voice carrying the determination that had sustained her through 8 months of homeless investigation and 3 years of fighting for justice. No one else will die from the systematic negligence that killed you. Not if I can help it. Not if there are people willing to listen to patients instead of profit margins. Maya stood, put her phone in her pocket and walked back toward her car, ready to begin another federal investigation that would hold corrupt healthcare administrators accountable for their crimes against the patients they were supposed to heal and protect. The fight for medical integrity was far from over, but Maya Williams had proven that sometimes the most important medical knowledge comes not from prestigious institutions or expensive credentials, but from people who refuse to remain silent when the system fails those who need it most. Justice had been served, but vigilance would be eternal. Thank you for all your amazing comments on our previous videos. We read every single one, and they truly inspire us to keep telling these incredible stories. If Maya's journey moved you, please like this video and subscribe so we can continue bringing you tales of courage and justice that need to be heard. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, and we'll see you in the next story.